Over there.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Many thanks for accepting our invitation to this thought-provoking conversation on leading with dignity. We want to explore how honoring human value is key to building sustainable organizations. We want to learn how dignity-centered leadership fosters thriving teams, ethical practices, and long-term resilience. This conference is part of the Deusto Business School strategic commitment to humanistic leadership as a transversal training access for the school's participant, thus making its strategic plan motto, transforming our world together. I want to thank the support we receive from Fundación Vizcaína Aguirre. Thanks to their support, we have the honor to have with us today to Donna Hicks, to Michael Pirson, and Adela Balderas, that's going to moderate this thought-provoking conversation. I will ask you to come up so I can present each of you, and we can start the conversation.
Please. Thank you so much.
You can sit whatever.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So let's start by Donna. Donna Hicks is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. She was the deputy director of the Program on International Conflict Analysis and Resolution at the same center. Dr. Hicks facilitated dialogues in numerous unofficial diplomatic efforts in the Middle East, in Sri Lanka, in Cambodia, Colombia, Cuba, Libya, and Syria. She's been consultant to the BBC in Northern Ireland, where she co-facilitated different television series. Her book, Dignity, its essential role in resolving conflict, has been published by Yale University Press in 2011, and her second book, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture that Brings Out the Best in People, has been published in August 2018. Michael Pirson, PhD, is the chair of the Leading People and Organization area within the Gavely School of Business at Fordham University. He's the James Donner Endowed Chair in Global Sustainability and is full professor with a focus on humanistic management and social entrepreneurship. Michael is a research associate also at Harvard University Human Flourishing Program, and he's co-founded the Humanistic Management Network and is founder and president of the International Humanistic Management Association. He's a full member of the Club of Rome. He leads the working group at the Union Prime in Humanistic Management. And last but not least, Adela Balderas, who's going to moderate the conversation. It's an associate professor and researcher at our school, at Deusto Business School. She's a research fellow at the University of Oxford, and she's also a research affiliate at the MIT in Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She's lecturing in our school in the bachelor, undergraduate level, in the graduate level, and also in executive education. I want to thank the two international speakers that are with us, and also to Adela, that she's going to moderate and is going to be part of the conversation. So now, Adela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Dean, for this warm welcome. Thank you very much indeed to our guest. It's an honor to be here with such esteemed experts for everybody, and especially on the topic of dignity. We are thrilled to have the opportunity to discuss such an important, timely subject with Dr. Hicks and Dr. Pirson. Today we will dive into what dignity means, and definitely how we can better recognize and foster it into our own lives, and the role in the conflict resolution and societal well-being. But before we dive into this conversation and this discussion, I would like to let you know that you have some cards that you can write your questions on that whenever you want to. We will have some space for conversation, and we are really looking forward to a conversation, by the way. We discussed about that as well, and it will be really good if we can all talk about this crucial topic. So this discussion is structured into 3 parts. There will be the background, a little bit of, let's say, theory, but just a little bit of context. Then we'll go into practical implications, and we will talk about the future. So thank you very much indeed for being here again. And I will start with you. Is that okay, Donna?
Yes.
Sure. Dr. Hicks, Donna, with one of her books, Dignity. Let me tell you something. I would like to begin with a quote or reflection in your book that really stands out to me. Please let me read this literally. I have found that most people are unaware of their own inherent value and worth, and are usually at a loss for how to recognize it in others. We're talking about dignity. This ignorance causes a lot of emotional pain and anguish, as well as failed relationships of all kinds. And you add, dignity not only explains an aspect of what it means to be human, but also is a hallmark of our shared humanity. Everyone wants to be treated in a way that shows they matter, we matter. So it's really, it's very special to read what you write. So this is why it's a real honor to be here with you. Donna, could you share with us what dignity means to you, and why did you start researching and working on dignity?
Well, as Alvaro pointed out, I had been spending most of my career in doing international conflict resolution, where I would bring parties together to hopefully try to work out a peace agreement or to at least come to some kind of compromise. And during the time, and I'm a psychologist, my training is in political psychology, and so we had a kind of a psychological approach to these dialogues that we did. And we were always talking about the political issues, you know, that divided the parties. But inevitably, somebody on either side of the conflict would have this explosive reaction to something somebody said in the dialogue. And I would look, I mean, it was just, you know, you could, when you see somebody explode like that, get so angry and so upset, and I thought, whoa, what can we do here? We have to talk about this. And so at one point I said to this person who got so upset, I said, my gosh, that was such a strong emotional reaction. Could you please tell us what was going on for you then? What was happening? And he said to me, emotions? This isn't about emotions. This is about justice. This is about identity. This is about political, okay. I said, okay, sorry. Because, you know, emotions they think is weak. You don't want to label them emotional. So I thought, oh boy, I've made a big mistake. Then I went back to Harvard and I started this group. I was looking at trauma, you know, because I thought these are trauma reactions, what they're experiencing. They've gone through hell. And they have this trauma inside them. So anyway, I think I was in a different part of the world at that point. The second time I tried to introduce a way of talking about what was happening with them, I said, okay, when this explosive thing happened, same thing, somebody exploded, and I said, okay, you know what, can we just stop for a minute? Because I said, I have a feeling that maybe this is a trauma response that you have. You've been through terrible things. And, you know, can we talk about that trauma that you experienced? And the person said, trauma? This is not about trauma. This is about justice. This is about politics. Okay. Ay, ay, ay. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got one more chance. You know, 3 times and you're out. So I've got one more chance to figure out how to get them to talk about these big explosions they were experiencing. Because I realized that there were actually 2 conversations taking place at these dialogues. The politics, which we were talking about at the table, but then under the table were these emotional tsunamis that were happening. So anyway, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I said, all right, if they were to say what was going on for them and the reason why they were so angry, it would be something like, how dare you treat us this way? Don't you see we're suffering? Can't you see we're human beings? And you're doing nothing about it. And so all of a sudden, bingo, I said, this is about their dignity. This is about being treated as if they weren't even human beings and nobody cared about their suffering. Okay, so finally, I thought I had the word. So I think I was in Colombia this last time when this next explosion occurred. And I said, okay, can we just stop for a minute? Because I could see you just had a big reaction here. I didn't even say whatever, you know, I just had a big reaction. And I said, you know, I've been all over the world doing these conflict resolution dialogues, and I have a feeling that if you're like anybody else that I've worked with, underlying this response that you had really is a violation to your dignity. You're upset because your dignity's been trampled on. The guy sat up. You're right. This is about our dignity. This is about our dignity. And they felt validated by that word. That word was legitimized everything that they'd experienced. And I said, okay, so if you don't mind, why don't we just have a discussion about what happened to you and what ways in which your dignity has been assaulted by this conflict? So that opened those doors. For the first time, I felt like I found the word and I found the way in to that fundamentally human reaction to being treated as if you don't even matter with these conflicts. So that's how it all started. And from that moment on, once I felt like I hit the jackpot with the word dignity, and everybody responded so powerfully to it, I realized, whoa, this is a hidden dimension to these conflicts. But nobody in these formal negotiations, let me tell you, nobody talks about any of the human responses or the underlying psychological issues. Nobody talks about that. But to call that dignity and reactions to being treated so badly, it just opened doors like it never had in the past. So I decided in that first book right there, I decided I had to write about this. I felt like I had an obligation because I felt like I had an understanding of a missing link that I had and why these conflicts just kept, going on and on, because nobody was able to talk about this human dimension. So I researched this book on dignity, and I wanted a way to use dignity in a very practical sense. I wanted to help reduce the suffering that I saw in front of me, the suffering from these dignity violations. And so it took me 7 years to write that first book. Because there was nothing written, I had to create my own approach. I call it now the dignity model. And so really, it's a very basic idea that we were all born worthy. Every single one of us was born, and when we come into the world, we have dignity. We don't have to do anything to have dignity. It's there. But what we have to do, as you pointed out in that piece, we have to accept our dignity. We have to embrace it. We have to take care of it. But I'll tell you, a lot of the people I work with when I do consulting, they haven't even thought about their dignity. They thought that dignity came from something they've done, got a good degree, got a big house, job promotions. those external things. So that's how it all started, and that's how I came to realize that leading with dignity, if leaders weren't on board with this, and they didn't understand how much power there was to treating people well in the workplace, because then I went into the workplace. And once you unleash that power of dignity, amazing things happen. In cultures or in businesses or in organizations, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But that's the background, that's the context, that's how I figured out how important this is, not only just to these parties in conflict, but to everybody. You know, I had this one, sorry, I got one more little story. This one general that I was working with in Colombia after we did a dignity workshop, he came up to me and he said, Donna, not only did this dignity approach solve the problems that we were having in this room, but I think you saved my marriage. The poor guy's thinking about all the ways he's violated his wife's dignity over the years, you know, so go ahead.
So, yeah, from that emotional tsunami, the word came out.
Yeah.
We were talking about the back to basics in some way, Dr. Pirson. One of the key remarks I would like to highlight also from one of your books, you mentioned literally there is a clear need for a better story of who we are as human beings. What motivated you to research on humanistic management and leadership?
There's so many motivations, I think we all probably yearn for something better, right? And so for me, I grew up in Germany. We had communistic Germany and capitalistic, quote unquote, Germany. And I remember, I was at the border. I grew up near Switzerland and France, so I was crossing borders every day almost to go with my bike. And I thought borders were just something there. Yeah, you can manage it, but I was at the German border at one point, visiting my grandparents, and remember having a gun pointed at me and knowing that the zone where it was clear-cut, it was mined. And I was maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, but I remember I wanted to run there because it was free space to play soccer or something. I was like, I couldn't, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I can go through Switzerland and France, no problem. In Germany, I cannot even go to the field or cross it, and would be threatened to be shot at. And it's like, okay, there is something deeper here that has us set up these kind of barriers, and it ultimately connects to, if you want to go deeper, who do we think we are? What do we want? At this point, we had two answers. The socialistic answer is we want to be together and create something together, and communism is this utopic kind of way, and we achieve it by command and control. And in the capitalist way, it was like, okay, we let people do it, and ultimately what we want, we're sort of greedy little bastards. We want money, we want more, and so that's what we want to create. And all of these things are sort of right. That's why we had such a long time of socialist appeal. That's why we still have this appeal of capitalism. But I do think that the current version of capitalism is leaving many things to be desired, right? We are facing the limits of a exploitative, quote-unquote, extraction-oriented system, whether you call it capitalism or not. I think the terms are useless. They were used to sort of label somebody that you don't like, X, Y, Z, socialist or capitalist or whatever, so it's just an insult. But if you go deeper in the academic perspective or the rigor of the thinking, then it's like, okay, certain assumptions of who we are, right? And I do think we have better insights, better knowledge about who we are at the core. And there are a couple of basic things, and you can use the shorthand of dignity. We want to be treated with dignity. That doesn't necessarily mean that we want to be poor, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't want to be rich all the time, but we want to be seen as somebody that matters, and we have basic foundational needs that drive to acquire certain things, to make us survive, to be in relationship with others in a meaningful way, and we have purpose in our lives that is bigger than ourselves, and we want to be safe psychologically and physically. That's the evolutionary insight. There is pretty much a convergence of that insight at a level that we haven't really noticed it, because we have these blueprints in our society about who we are as people that, as you said, are under the table. And they're constantly sort of referenced as what is possible and what's not possible. So when we address the bigger issues that we're facing right now, and they're just mounting and mounting and mounting, whether it's war or it's environmental degradation or it's some kind of inequality or whatever it may be, it matters who we think we are, because that's what we take with us as problem-solving background. And if we have a better understanding of who we are and what the problems actually are, then we can address the dignity issues and solve the problem. And unfortunately, our leadership development, our universities, in many ways, are in a trap. Schools, the journalism, the stories that we tell about each other are stories of, in the end, we're doomed. And that's not part of life, right? We have this doom story going on. We focus on the negative. Social media has that inherent bias for fear. The news in general gets picked up when we talk about the negative things, but in the end, that's not what gives us life and hope and ways to actually collaborate. And we are the product of collaboration. Our species has survived because we can solve problems that we can't solve ourselves. And so business, good leadership is allowing the conditions for people to solve problems, and dignity and honoring the dignity of people is just functionally better. It's just allowing people to then have space in the limited brain capacity to sort of say, all right, I'm safe enough, I have quality relationships, and maybe I'm doing something meaningful and can contribute, and therefore I want to solve this problem together with you. And that's where you can create peace, but you can also solve all the other smaller issues, right? And so that's why I think this is critical, what the story is about who we are and how we then basically engage with others.
Dr. Hicks, Donna, you
Yes,
also...
please, Donna. I prefer it.
Donna, you also highlight in your book that there is, literally you say dignity is not the same as respect. Can you explain us that, please?
Yes, I mean, as I said earlier, my simple definition of dignity is that it's our inborn value and worth. Inborn meaning we're literally born with it. We enter the world valuable, and if you think about these little infants, these little children, babies who come into our lives, and we see them, we'd never say they don't have any value. In fact, we'd say they're invaluable, they're priceless, they're irreplaceable. So dignity is something that we all have, but we all may not be aware of how much we have that and how we can use it as an inner resource of power. Because once you actually accept your dignity and you embrace it and you use it, the power is extraordinary, what you can achieve if you've embraced your own dignity. But anyway, respect. When I was working with these parties in conflict, and often we'd be working with the soldiers, the people who were out in the field, and they would go like this. They'd pound their fist on the table and they say, "We demand respect. We demand respect." And I'd say to them, wait a minute. Respect is a bridge too far. What you could demand from each other is that you treat each other with dignity. You can demand to be treated with dignity. That is something we can work with. We can work with that. But respect has to be earned. And there's no way, when I was looking at them, they're killing each other. There was no way I could get them to say, okay, I respect you. But I could get them to say, all right, I'll think about treating you with dignity. If if you have this inborn value and you're a human being just like me, okay, we can have a conversation about dignity, they would say. So that's the distinction. But wherever I go, people often, when I ask like an audience like you, I would say, okay, what do you think dignity is? 9 times out of 10, people would say respect. It would be the first thing that they say. And I would have to say, look, it really isn't the same thing. And making that distinction is helpful even in the corporate world, because people say to me, well, this person has really treated me badly. I don't want to have to respect them. How can I respect somebody who's treated me so badly? And I would say, okay, fine, let them earn your respect. but you really, all of us have to treat each other with dignity. That's kind of the baseline where we start. And that's, of course, we're below the baseline most of the time. We're not very good at it, and we have to learn how to do that. What does it look like to honor each other's dignity? And so it's something we have to learn, because even though we're all born with dignity, we're not born knowing how to act like it. So we have to learn it. We have to learn it. So.
There is a path. We do have to learn it. And Michael, in 2017, so a few years ago, you mentioned, as you can witness almost daily, we live in tumultuous times. 2017. We face an array of global crises. These crises require a fundamental rethinking of how we organize at the global political level, the society level, the economic level, and the organizational level. So Michael, do you believe that this rethinking is more urgent than ever?
Sure, and it's really like, it's an imperative. Right? And I think we're running into the bigger issues as we're not using an alternative way of, as I said, seeing who we are and what we want. Right? And so it's the definition of insanity. We keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result. But no, it's very predictable that what we're organizing for, if you organize for GDP growth, power, which is now big again, power, and wealth, yeah, you're going to get massive dignity violations, even though sometimes you have sort of learning cycles where you say, all right, we need to attenuate that. We need to account for the dignity. Maybe we need to have a social safety system. Maybe we need to have a defense system that works. Maybe we need to have other basic systems like a fundamental sort of, I don't know, you can call it meaning-making systems, right? Or religions, or like in some way some kind of elaborate or sophisticated spirituality that can get you to understand a bigger context in which you're living. And if we don't have that, if our religion becomes the golden calf, if our religion becomes wealth, power, etc., which we are experiencing at an extreme right now, it's just very predictable that we'll have conflict. That's the only way it can go, because you're denying the dignity of most people, and we have survived because we don't allow other people to destroy us. Yeah, and so organizing in that sense is important, and that's smart. And when we're talking about a business school or something, business is a very advanced institution to channel some of the fundamental human creativity and energy of problem solving in a productive and peaceful way. Before business, we had the army, and that's why we created the army, and more conflict, and much of the learning happened in preparing yourself for war. We have the analogies of war in business in many ways, right? In the corporate context, competition, and all of these kind of market share and all of these. But that's not necessarily a language that gets us to dignity or flourishing or any of those things. So we need to more deeply rethink that. Should we want to create conditions that are better for everyone, right? And I think the good news in the increasing tumultuousness is like we don't really have many more options, right? So at some point, I think it's just like everybody knows already, and I think that's why we're experiencing this massive desperation. We experience increased suicide rates, massive more depression. It's because people don't have an alternative future to live into that gives them hope. They only see the past, they only see what's going on right now, and they read the news, the social media, and it's like, yeah, that's depressing. That's a story of extinction. And at some point, we're going to step into our intelligence, or not. But should we choose we want to survive, then we'll smarten up, wisen up, and hopefully the institutions like the higher education, journalism, business are part of that. It's just better for everyone, right? Even for the ones that want to make more money, it's better to honor the dignity of their stakeholders, right? Or people, you can say.
We were mentioning before that even the work is changing. We were talking about the great attrition, the great resignation. did we lose the sense of belonging or the sense of the meaning, of the sense of the purpose?
Well, one of the elements of dignity that I've come up with 10 different ways to honor people's dignity, and belonging is one of them. That we humans just have this desire to be connected, to belong, whether it's to an organization or a community or identity group. We have that desire for belonging. And I think one of the problems is when you get into a work environment and you don't feel like you do belong, you don't feel like you've been included, or maybe you've been left out of a bunch of meetings and you feel like, oh my gosh, I should be there. I did all the work for this meeting and I'm getting none of the recognition for everything that I've done. So people eventually start feeling like, this is not a great place, Often they don't even feel safe to speak up. That, oh my gosh, this is not the kind of place I want to be. Instead, what do? Go out the door. They'll find another job, And so, and interestingly enough, by the way, I just want to point this out, that there are 10 elements of dignity. The first is accepting identity. People want their identity accepted no matter who they are, no matter their race, religion, ethnicity, so on. People want recognition, especially in the workplace. They want a little pat on the back if they do a good job and contribute. They want acknowledgement if something goes wrong. They want somebody to say, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. That shouldn't have happened. They want to be treated fairly. They want to be understood. I mean, we humans are really good at judging each other. Sometimes we judge people even before we get to know them. And it's so powerful to feel like you've been understood. But boy, that's a big reason why people leave, is because they don't feel understood. They feel like they're, What else? Benefit of the doubt. People want the benefit of the doubt. People want an apology if something bad happens to them. And like I said, inclusion is a very big one. It's a big one. People want that sense of belonging. So I hope I got through all the 10. Oh, safety. Safety is another one. They want to feel safe in their environment. And that's both psychological safety and physical safety. So I give people these surveys after I go in and talk about these 10 elements, and I say, tell me, which of these 10 elements that I've just explained to you do you think is most often violated in your workplace? You want to guess which one it was? Does anybody want to guess? Identity, recognition, fairness. Anyway, I thought it would be fairness. I thought it would be identity, too. People don't like to be discriminated against because of some aspect of it. No. 80% of the people that, when I first went into this giant corporation, 80% of the respondents said they didn't feel safe. That was their major worry about their dignity violation. And I said, what? Safety? And I said, tell me more. Why don't you feel safe in your workplace? And they would consistently say, I don't feel safe to speak up when my manager or my boss violates my dignity. I just don't feel safe. I'm afraid I'm not going to, get a good performance review. I'm afraid they're going to lash back at me and make life miserable, or they even are afraid they're going to lose their job if they tell their boss that that they've violated their dignity. So this safety issue is another big one, why people leave. Because we humans, we don't like conflict. So we're afraid if we confront our boss, if we go there and say, whoa, you may not have known it, but what you said to me in that staff meeting was really hurtful. But they just suck it up, They don't feel like the power imbalance is so great. They're scared. They're just scared. So that's behind it.
That's behind it. And did you find, Donna, any element that for leaders was most difficult to struggle with?
Well, I think recognition came up a lot about when I interviewed a lot of leaders. They felt like, well, you don't want to praise them too much because then they'll get lazy if you keep praising.
Oh, wow.
They have all these excuses. And, let me just say here for the record, I've worked with some wonderful, wonderful leaders in companies and in corporations, and they all have really good intentions. Maybe there's Michael always reminds me there's the psychopaths there too, so don't forget about them. But for the most part, nobody wants to end up thinking of themselves as a dignity violator. But if, like I said earlier, if you don't learn this, if you don't raise your consciousness about the effect that you have on other people, because here's the thing, and many of these dignity violations occur unconsciously. You're not even aware of it, because we all have blind spots too, And we need each other to help us see what we can't see. So we need really good, skillful feedback strategies. And I'm not talking 360s here. I'm talking to a face-to-face and to tell people, hey, look, you might not have been aware of how hard it was for me when you talked to me that way in a meeting. And so, but there are skillful ways of doing that feedback. But it's really, good people, good leaders with good intentions, without having a consciousness of dignity, can end up violating people without even knowing it. So that's why Michael and I say this, you have to make an effort, you have to learn this stuff, and you have to be open to hearing from your people what the effect is that you have on them.
Yeah, probably to be open is not that easy, Michael. But what roles do stakeholders beyond employees and customers play in a humanistic management approach, in a way?
Also, I don't know how it is here, but in the conversation in the United States, the big shift between shareholder to stakeholder capitalism has happened. The language has shifted, but in the end, the practice is the same. So it doesn't really matter. That's why I don't necessarily like shareholder, stakeholder. It's people. Right? If we started to talk about people, I think it doesn't really matter. They play a role here in some of our customers, employees, clients, suppliers. We're probably playing that role all the time, all at once. And the functionality, if I just want to sort of focus about like working relationships or relationships that work, is the same. Like if I feel like I'm a human resource, or I'm just like your ATM machine or your customer or whatever, I don't really want to work with you. I would love to find another option. That's why I'm leaving if I can. And if I have the option of leaving, I will, right? But that's not really what we're, like, if we aim for that, I think we have to develop this moral or this higher human ambition of what can we achieve, what do we want. Are we happy with this? No, people get depressed. They're depressed. The stakeholders are not excited. But when you see it, when you study it, and we have the privilege of studying it, when you have these ecosystems like at Mondragon or like in other places, that sometimes they're utopias, they're called utopias. Like some people call them positive deviants. No, there's a new realism I think that's needed. We want that. We prefer that. If we can opt into a relationship that's dignity-based, we will honor that. We will want to thrive in that. We want to contribute. I think there's a big mistake that people think, like you're saying with the recognition, that, when we treat people with dignity, they'll just sort of be lazy and lay back. And as if that's the story about people. Like we're fundamentally bad. This veneer theory is we're just going to cheat our way through life. That's not accurate. There is a small percentage of people that will do that. But most people, and that's what we know from when they thrive, when they're productive, when they live long, they want to meaningfully contribute to something. And where is the option to do that? Every stakeholder wants that. Unfortunately, our organizations aren't really geared to provide meaningful engagement, right? And so you become cynical. All I do in this bank or this is like profit for some kind of shareholder, or maybe let's say for stakeholders. No, doesn't matter. Like, what is the function of this organization here? What part of life is it making better? And I think I'm just throwing it out to all of you. How do you feel most satisfied? the social psychology is very clear. We need to feel this deep kind of sense of contribution, of being used up in a powerful, meaningful way. And that oftentimes happens in volunteer work where people don't get paid at all. And it's absurd that we need to resort to volunteer work that's not paid to buffer against the nonsense that we have to do when we get paid. So what is the moral imagination? What's the human imagination? What is the power that lies in that as an option to work when you say dignity or in purposeful ways for humanity? I call it creating a world that works for all, right? It's like, oh, okay, that gives you a little bit of a different kind of way of doing something important. And I think that's really the huge opportunity that we all have, that education can provide, that business schools can provide, that anybody can contribute to. Starting a conversation about how can we meaningfully engage with one another, which problems do we want to solve and contribute to. And it's like, okay, you have a better way of life, you live longer, you're happier, you're not depressed. Right?
In your experience, in both cases, John and Michael, what industries have been the most receptive, if we could say so, to humanistic management principles, or to talk about dignity, or to dive into dignity?
What's the
What
question?
industries, what sectors? Is there, could you mention a sector or industry?
Well, my experience has been, and I don't have as much experience as Michael with the corporations and the business world, but my experience has shown me that smaller businesses, it's easier in a small, like a family-owned business, where the values are already in there in the family. They want to make a positive contribution to the community. But that's not, doesn't have to be a small community, a small business, but because I have done work in big corporations too, where people have just made a commitment to treating each other with dignity. And, I just want to say one more thing about dignity that Michael just triggered a thought in my mind, that one of the things that I think, we're experiencing so much division, especially in the United States. We've got terrible polarization, and people are more divided than ever now in the United States. And we ask the question, what could bring us together, And dignity, oh, wow, what about dignity? And one of the things that I tell people is that everywhere I've been in the world, and I've worked in every single, conflict all over the world, everybody wants the same thing. They want to be treated as if they matter. They want to be treated with dignity. And so I became fascinated with this idea that, wait a minute, maybe it's not common ground we want to look for in order to resolve our issues or get along better in our workplace. I think what we need is higher ground. And the higher ground is the mutual recognition that we all deserve dignity. We're all born with it. We all come into the world with it. And that unifying peace, that peace that can bring us together and address the divisions, is our shared humanity, our shared desire to be treated with dignity. And in corporations, I don't care if it's big or small, if we can come to that higher ground, and if we can come to realize, well, what we share is bigger, way bigger than what divides us. We are all human beings who want the same thing. Like Michael was saying, we all want a comfortable life, and we want to contribute to the greater good. That's the truth. I see my students now say to me, I want a meaningful life. I want to contribute to the greater good. I don't want just to make a lot of money to have a lot of money. I do, like Michael was saying, I really want to feel that my life is worth something because I'm contributing. And dignity can take us there. Dignity can take us there because it's really a part of having dignity consciousness is realizing that we need to extend ourselves to the greater good. If we're going to contribute to the well-being of humanity, we need to do that. And Anybody can do it. You don't have to be a CEO or a famous person. Anybody's capable of contributing to the greater good. So Michael, thanks for that thought. I just went round and round with it.
Michael, you mentioned some companies as models of humanistic management. Could you share maybe a lesser known or a company that surprised you in any way?
I mean, this is fascinating because I've gone through business education, and for all of you here, I think if you do business education, you oftentimes get Harvard Business School cases and studies, and so that's almost better than just reading theory, but it's also a selection bias, right? And oftentimes you get stories about some alumni of Harvard Business School that graduates and then sort of tells a story of a public company, publicly listed company, and so the problem set is very much similar in terms of it's a corporate set. And the corporate set is not even questioned. It's clear that you have to maximize profit, shareholder value, and within that you sort of solve some kind of problem of market share or some kind of operational problem or something. So I think it's just interesting to note that the amount of publicly listed organizations is infinitely small in comparison to all businesses in the world. It's 0.001 per mil. Like, you can't even say per mil, right? Like there's 350 million businesses apparently in the world, but 1,000, or maybe, I don't know, it's 1,000 or maybe some, don't quote me on that number, but it's in comparison, very few that are publicly listed. Still, for business education, we use them as the model. So now that you're asking, what are the surprises? The surprise is actually that so many businesses, the majority of businesses, run humanistically. They don't have a name. They don't blurt it out. They don't sort of go out there and have Harvard Business School or Deusto Business School or whichever business school replicate that model and share that story. It's just assumed that that is normal. Family businesses cannot run based on the corporate model. If you tell your son, you're my my human resource, and I'm gonna now give you maybe a day off or not, or we're gonna bargain at the table, that's not workable. That's not workable because the person is not a human resource. It's your spouse, it's your son, it's somebody, if you don't treat them with dignity, you will have conflict and your family business will not run. So you have to find ways. Are we very good at that? Not necessarily. Most families have troubles, right? Family businesses have troubles. But I'm just pointing to the surprises actually that 99% of organizations are run humanistically. They may not be aware of the terminology, right? But the bigger piece is oftentimes what people say, okay, it's not possible because I always focus on these publicly listed organizations and the big CEOs that go on the magazine cover. It's like, yeah, those are an exception. And unfortunately, they have a lot of power. And they get more and more power by the way that we tell their stories as this is real business, right? That's what you oftentimes get. The real world is like this. No, this is a very exceptional world that we're talking about, that we're elevating. But in that context, we have looked at all of these companies that despite being these exceptional sort of publicly listed companies, run according to these principles. You shouldn't be surprised because those principles are just better. They make it work longer. And any organization that is interested in creating success for long term has to go back to these principles, whether they call it that or not. So the only organizations that are actually violating it consistently are those that are interested in the short run. And those happen to be very powerful banks, right? And that's why we have the financial crisis and we still have that same kind of model. And that kind of model is just running its course because how can you create long-term value if you're oriented towards the monthly report or quarterly report or whatever? That didn't used to be the case, you know? Many companies, even in Europe here, had the permission, even when they're publicly listed, to report yearly. Or in Japan is what they had 100-year. Every time you have this longer term orientation, it doesn't matter if they're publicly listed or not, if they're big or small, if they're in this sector or that sector, you gotta acknowledge the laws of human collaboration, right? And then you get to these principles. And I think, unfortunately, the tragedy is that we're very good at uneducating us from our humanity, right? So we're learning, and I think business schools, I'm a member of a business school, we're culprits in the space of dehumanization. And therefore we get the kind of leadership that we oftentimes experience as sort of not helpful.
I think it's time to open the conversation.
Yes, that'd be great.
So if you have any question, please raise your hand or just write in the notes that you can, we'll read them for you. And, but before they make the questions, or if you, do you have any question?
Or comments. You don't have to have a question. You can just comment. on what
Comments,
you-
yes, or suggestions.
Yeah, or suggestions.
Oh, there is a question there. Yeah, so that's really good. Yeah, we do have a question. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, right here. Right here.
Thank you very much.
There's a microphone
It's
there.
right here, Alvaro. Sorry. The microphone.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this so interesting conversation. I have a question. Would you say men and women, would you say men and women approach dignity in a different way?
You know, as a woman, I'd like to say yes to that, you know. But honestly, my experience has been that when you have a really deep conversation with someone, whether it's a man or a woman, they appreciate this. I don't see a distinction between men and women. I think everybody wants this, no question about it. Everybody wants to be treated this way, and when they're not, they really do suffer. And I think women might be a little more likely to talk about it, like with a friend or with somebody. And I think men, I mean, this isn't across the board true, but I think some men find it difficult to speak about ways in which they feel like they've had their dignity injured, because then they might look weak or vulnerable or something. But I think people experience it pretty much the same way, these violations. Yeah, I do.
Any more questions? Yeah.
If I may add as a man, I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah, let the man answer that.
I think that's where the fundamental humanity comes into play. It's not different. It's not different. And there are very many women that have no dignity consciousness.
Oh,
There are
I've seen
very
that.
many women that do. But there are also very many men that have that, right? And so I think it's not as easy just to say we need more women or we need more diversity or whatever the potential solution is. I think we need more humanity everywhere, right?
Just another.
Yeah, I wanted to ask.
Kira.
Hi. So, what do we do? And on an organizational level, because we could approach this from an individual perspective. I read the book, I practice in my environment, but as an organization, how should an organization go about pushing, stimulating, encouraging, leading with dignity?
Do you want me to take it first and then you go? So what I learned a lot the first time I went into the corporate world. It was a big organization, huge, international. And the employees were really disgruntled, really miserable, and the leadership team was not treating them very well. And what the leadership team said to me is, oh, we've got a problem over here in this department. You go there first, and you fix that, you know, you solve that conflict over there. So I thought to myself at the time, ooh, I don't think so. I think I need to start with the leadership team, because there might be some connection between that conflict over there. And they said, no, wait, I don't want you to do that. No, you just go fix it. I want to see what you do over here. So I went over there, fixed the problem, but fixed it only to discover that the problem was with policy that these executives were making, right? So it made me realize that if an organization really wants to embrace dignity and become a dignity organization, the leadership team has to buy into it 100%. Because everybody's watching the leadership team. You know, they're watching their behaviors, they're watching their commitment to this and that and the other thing. And if the leadership team embodies these principles of dignity that I've described, the culture shifts automatically. And so the culture, where, remember I said before, this was the culture, or this was the organization where 80% of them said they were too afraid to speak up because they didn't want their bosses, mistreated, giving them a bad performance review or whatever. Well, that's what inspired me to write Leading with Dignity, because I realized this is not something that you can just, go to this part or that part or this part. It has to be a commitment on the part of the leadership team, and people have to feel like they're watching their leaders and they're watching them treat them with dignity. That's when the culture shifts almost automatically. It's really very powerful. So starting with a leadership team, and I talk about dignity education, where we get MBAs and all kinds of degrees. Well, we need a degree in dignity. So I do this dignity work with executive leadership teams first, and make sure that they have the skills and they have the language and they have the experiences enough to really then call themselves dignity leaders. But it takes a commitment. It takes an effort and it takes commitment, because some of the times, as leaders, what we have to do is unlearn a whole lot of bad stuff. Like the power issues and how to use and abuse power. Because with power, with dignity, I mean, we use power to empower others, not to disempower them. And that's a big shift for a lot of people, so.
Thank you for the next steps, yeah.
I just want to respond to that, because it's like, there are multiple answers to how an organization does, but I think maybe a helpful way is to see an organization not as a construct or an abstract thing, but a human community. So in the end, what happens with organizations, teams, relationships, it's a human-to-human conversation. At the core, that's everything that you need to shift. What are the conversations? And that is the conversations in society, in global politics, but it's also the conversations that you have with your spouse, your friends, your kids, whatever it means. So in the end, I would say, no, it's not just about the leadership. It's like, are you going to be stepping into leadership? Is everybody going to step into leadership, right? And we oftentimes have this kind of perspective on organizational transformation and change. Somebody else needs to do it, right? And it's like, oh, it's great. Like, if only they did it, it's like, this is going to get you nowhere, right? The dignity conversation is a conversation that actually allows a leader-full organization. But we're not necessarily equipped, and many of us have disempowered ourselves. And what I oftentimes see is like, oh, if only the other person, if only the other person, if only this. So we're on the constant search of a scapegoat, because they didn't do it, that can't happen. Because this is like that. No. So in that sense, I think humanistic leadership, Liderazgo humanista, is actually taking 100% responsibility. 100% responsibility for the conversations that you have. And we all can do that, because we all lead conversations, right? But oftentimes, we're not getting it clear in terms of how we do lead conversations with whom. And then, of course, certain people have more authority or have maybe more access to communication or conversations. But it's like a community of conversations. That a network of conversations is what makes an organization, right? And so whatever you have in the conversation, a dignity consciousness or dignity-based conversation or not, is what you're getting at the higher level. So I would just suggest that, yes, no matter where you are, don't let whatever somebody else disempower you that you can't create these kind of conversations, right? Because that's the toxicity, and I think that's where we all give up our own dignity and power. Because we let others sort of take over. And I think that's the biggest tragedy that we are experiencing, is that people are abdicating leadership.
So I just want to say that, I didn't mean that it's just the leadership's responsibility. Everybody is responsible in a dignity organization. And the education, dignity education goes, when I do it, it sometimes takes a long time if it's a big corporation, because everybody who works there signs on to a dignity pledge, and they've had a dignity education. So I thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, no, I'm just general. We oftentimes have this when we teach business education. It's like the standard. The leadership isn't on board. If this team isn't on board, Ultimately, what oftentimes happens is just people sort of explain and rationalize inaction. Right? And I was like, okay, then you're very smart at analyzing, and analysis paralysis. I think that's the biggest problem that we have in universities. We're training people to be very good in analytics, but not in synthesis. right? And what we need more people is to be smart analytically, but then also be very capable in synthesis. And that's where leadership actually happens. It's not by sitting back and analyzing an armchair quarterbacking, right? But that's really, unfortunately, much of society is paid to comment on others.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's no good, you know, that's not getting us anywhere.
Before we finish, as we conclude our conversation, I'd like to thank you both, first of all, and then I would like to make you a question just to wrap up, if we don't have any more questions. Do we have any more questions? Do we? Yeah. I'd like to ask you both one final question that you already gave some of the answers, but just to wrap it up, what do you hope people, us, will take away from our discussion today? What would you like and hope? And how can we begin to incorporate the principles of dignity into our lives?
Well, I hope that we have sparked some curiosity in you. I would hope that you would say, oh, sounds pretty interesting. Maybe I should, look into this a little bit more. So sparking curiosity is the very first thing that I would say. And the other thing is that something I learned from working with Archbishop Tutu, I'm sorry, I always drop that name, but I learned so much from him. I worked with him for a decade. And he told me that I was explaining to him how when I was working with these people, the fighters, the rebels especially, and who would say to me, I'm fighting for my dignity because the other side stripped me of my dignity. Stripped me of my dignity. So that's why I'm fighting. I'm willing to die for it. That's what they would tell me. And when I first met Tutu, he asked me to tell him how I came to this idea about dignity. And I said, well, they were fighting to regain their dignity. And he looked at me, Tutu looked at me, and he said, what are you talking about? I said, oh, what did I say? He was like scolding me. What did I say? And he said, nobody can strip you of your dignity. Are you telling people that they can have their dignity stripped from them? This is what he said. And I said, no, that's just what they tell me. They tell me they've had their dignity stripped. And he said, tell them that's wrong. Tell them that's wrong. And he said, how do you think we got through apartheid in South Africa, we black Africans? How do you think we made it through all that dehumanization, being treated as if we're less than and inferior? And he said, we got through because we knew our dignity was in our hands and our hands only, and that nobody could take away our dignity from us. That's how we made it through. And, I have to admit, I really did think at one point that we could have our dignity stripped. So I'm just telling you the second thing that I would love you to think about Tutu scolding me, saying, no, nobody can strip you of your dignity. And then be sure that you've got it securely implanted within yourself, that you have a consciousness of your dignity, that you've got dignity, that nobody can take it away from you, and that you don't have to do anything, that you're worthy from the day you were born until the day you pass. So that would be my message, just to make sure, because honestly, I was like 40 years old before I claimed my dignity. I'm serious. I thought I was going to get dignity from all these degrees that I collected degrees, like 5 degrees. And guess what? At the end, there was no dignity in those degrees. And with the help of Archbishop Tutu, he really made me look inside and reflect and to be sure that I took care of my dignity. And I'm saying that to you because he always said to me, tell people they've got dignity and nobody can take it away from them. So I'm just honoring a request from him. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Michael?
What can I add?
Yeah, I know. I know.
You can add
I would have to bring Mandela up or
yeah,
something.
you bring up Mandela. He's got Mandela, yeah.
No, but what I'd like to say, maybe on a more pragmatic way, there is a huge opportunity. There's a huge opportunity for us, even at the business school, specifically with the alumni network, with the students, with the professors, to actually be sort of amplifiers, smart amplifiers. And this is not charity work, and it's not being nice at all. This is not nice. I think most people mistake the dignity management as being nice to people. No, that's BS. This is tough work, and you gotta hold people accountable for what they're doing and what they're not doing, and when they're violating dignity. These are very tricky kind of conversations. This is just for the tough guys, the tough gals, right? But this is the kind of stuff that I think we have the opportunity to get people to be more capable of. And I think one other thing is like graciousness and grace. We will violate our dignity constantly. But I think the big thing that I'm also learning from you is like, hey, if we have that dignity consciousness, at least we have a way to restore it or repair it in a way that we can actually work better together. And I think that's what the world needs. People like us working together to solve the big issues that we're facing. Right? And so that's the invitation that I think that's the opportunity also.
Thank you for the beautiful invitation and the words. I must admit that reading your books has been absolutely inspiring, so I really suggest you to read the books. And there are, as we come to the end of the conversation, I would like to leave the audience with one final quote from each other. Can I do that? Is that okay? Yes? So, Dr. Hicks, you say in your book, knowledge of dignity transforms into a way of being, because the more we engage dignity's potential, the more we become empowered by it. Mm-hmm. So that is really, really powerful. And Dr. Pirson, one of the critical stepping stones to better management theory and practice is a better and more accurate understanding of who we are as people. So thank you very much indeed, and I would like to invite our Dean to give and share our final words.
So many thanks, Donna, Michael, and Adela. I've just taken some notes, and I want to make 10 ideas that I think we could summarize what we've heard. Leading with dignity, great opportunity for our school. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The importance of psychology, the importance of self-awareness of our own dignity, the great responsibility of offering safe working places, recognition, identity, bearing in mind the effect on others, the need of others to see what we do not see. Leadership team has to embody dignity, knowledge, commitment, language, and practice. But the great responsibility of leading is in dignity. It's a responsibility of all of us, not only of the corporate leaders of each organization. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Adela. Now, you are ambassadors of the Deusto Business School in the world.
By the way, can I say one thing? We love this dean. We love him. You're so fortunate to have him as a dean, so we are so happy, yes.